Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I'm going to be taking a look at BT04 Great Legend, and it definitely has a lot of really new and interesting cards for us to be playing around with. So I figured I would make a really interesting black deck that I would like to label as Black Chaos Punch, where the whole idea of the deck is to try to utilize Blastmon, Chaosmon, and final Zubagon Punch to really add a lot of extra pressure onto the opponent and try to force them to make bad decisions and have those cards just try to close out the game that much faster and that much more efficient than some of the other black tools that they had before. So going over the deck, starting with the Digitama, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Kapurimon. So we're still using Kapurimon just because we are utilizing a lot of reboot synergy, and this Kapurimon is really good because of its inheritable ability, where while this Digimon has reboot, then it gets plus 1000 DP, so we still like the DP boost, it interacts with reboot, so we still want Kapurimon. And then the 5th Digitama could really be anything you feel like you want it to be, but for now I'm just adding in the starter deck Kapurimon as the 5th Digitama, just because it has a nice inheritable ability where during your turn, while this Digimon has blocker, then it gets plus 1000 DP. It's still just doing almost the exact same thing as the other Kapurimon, just with blocker instead of reboot, and we are going to be playing around with a couple of blockers in the deck, so it's not like it's a bad card either. Next, on to the rookies, I'm going to be playing 2 copies of Gotsumon. So Gotsumon is just a rookie blocker, and that's really the only reason why we're running him. He does have a higher DP than the starter deck Agumon, and that's really the only reason why I'm choosing him over the starter deck Agumon, but the fact that we still have a rookie blocker is pretty good. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of ToyAgumon. So this version of ToyAgumon is pretty good because he gives the inheritable ability of Reboot, and we definitely still want to make sure that our Megas that don't have Reboot will still have Reboot in some way. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Commandramon. So Commandramon is in here just because he is that value-efficient rookie, where he has a low play cost, some decent DP, low EVO cost, all making him a pretty decent card to think about playing. And then the last rookie of the deck is going to be 4 copies of ToyAgumon. So this ToyAgumon comes from the black starter deck, and he has a really good inheritable ability that's basically acting as our draw engine, where at the end of the opponent's turn, if an opponent's Digimon didn't attack at all during this turn, then you get to draw 1 card. So the whole idea behind this card is to try to utilize our early blockers, so that way we could have a good draw engine in the early game, so that way we can make sure we could see all of our pieces for the late game. Next, on to the champions, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Tankmon. So Tankmon is really only in here just because he has this really low EVO cost of 1, and he has 6000 DP, which is pretty nice to have, so that way if he gets Alter S, then he could survive the Alter S, but the fact that he has the low EVO cost is the primary reason why we want the card, so that way we could get up into our higher stages that much more efficiently. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Sealsdramon. So Sealsdramon is in here just because he is your stereotypical blocker. 2 to EVO, 6000 DP, has the when attacking clause of minusing 2 memory. So he's just doing what all of the other blockers are doing, and that's just not a bad thing, especially if we pair him up with ToyAgumon. Then in the early game, he's acting as a really good wall to just stop the opponent from attacking, so that way we could get some extra card draw. And then the last champion of the deck is going to be 4 copies of DarkTyrannomon. So this DarkTyrannomon is from the black starter deck, and he's basically doing almost the exact same thing as Sealsdramon and as Tankmon all in one card, where he is acting as a good early game blocker with a when attacking clause of losing 2 memory, so he still has the ability to attack, and he has an EVO cost of 1. The only trade-off is he has slightly lower DP, but the fact that he could still EVO for 1 and act as an early game blocker is very, very good, and it's everything that the deck wants to be doing. Next, onto the ultimates, I'm going to be running 4 copies of MetalGreymon. So MetalGreymon is pretty good because he has the reboot ability innately, so that way we could start utilizing some reboot synergy on the ultimate level, and then on top of which he has a really powerful inheritable ability, which is the primary reason why we're playing the card, where during your turn, while this Digimon has reboot, then it gains security attack +1. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Gogmamon. So Gogmamon is a pretty interesting Digimon because he has this good main ability of Digiburst 1. So we get to trash a Digivolution source to utilize his ability, and what the ability you're getting is one of your Digimon gets plus 2000 DP until the end of the opponent's next turn. So this is a really good buff because it lasts during your turn and the opponent's, so that way it makes it harder for the opponent to try to interact with the Digimon just because he's going to be naturally stronger. And then on top of which, this buff does carry over when you Digivolve, so that way if you Digivolve all the way up into your ultimate, then move out your ultimate, utilize his Digiburst to increase your DP, that buff will carry over to your Mega when you Digivolve him up, and the interesting thing is you could utilize this ability more than once, so if you want you could just pitch a couple of cards underneath him to give whatever you're going to be Digivolving up into a really sizable buff, so that way you can make your Digimon as powerful as they possibly can when you go into your Mega to try to close out the game. And then on top of which, he even has a really powerful inheritable ability where during all players' turns, this Digimon gets plus 1000 DP. So it's almost like a permanent plus 1000 DP buff, and that's just pretty good because, again, it makes your Digimon that much harder to interact with, and it makes it that much harder for them to deal with. And then the last ultimate of the deck is going to be one copy of Megadramon. So Megadramon is in here solely for the inheritable ability he has of giving our higher levels blocker. So this is acting similar to Boarludramon, except this is on a level 5 body and not a level 6 body, so that way it can work with all of our higher levels, and that's just what makes it really good because we still are going to be playing a tiny bit of blocker synergy, so that way we could, again, make it hard for the opponent to interact with our Digimon, and we could protect ourselves at the same time, because we are also playing with Reboot synergy, so Megadramon is just a pretty fantastic support card for the deck. Next, onto the Megas, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Craniamon. So Craniamon is still a pretty decent Digimon just because he innately has the blocker ability, so that way we could utilize a Mega Blocker to just try to wall the opponent out while we figure out ways to stall and aggress when we feel like we have a good enough board state to do so with. And then on top of which is the primary reason why we're going to be playing this card, is his other ability where during all turns, your blockers cannot be deleted by the opponent's card effects. So this is really, really important because it just helps stave off a lot of the opponent's control elements. So if they are playing with any control elements that just straight up will delete them, then Craniamon will prevent that deletion. Although Craniamon does have some innate weaknesses, like he still could be de-Digivolved, he could have his DP reduced, and he could be bounced. But regardless, the fact that we have some form of protection is still very, very good, and why we definitely want to still run the card. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Blastmon. So Blastmon is going to be one of the main Megas in the deck just because of how insanely strong this card can be. So first thing to note is he has an Evo cost of 3 with 13,000 DP, so he has slightly above average DP compared to a lot of other Megas, making him that much more threatening and dangerous to deal with. On top of which he has the Security Attack +1 ability, so he's naturally just already going to be hitting for a whole bunch of security, which is, again, pretty powerful, especially if we pair it up with MetalGreymon and having Reboot off of ToyAgumon, so that way he could potentially hit for 3 security. So again, that's just really strong at trying to pressure the opponent in close games faster. And then on top of that, he even has a win attacking ability where your opponent may choose one of their unsuspended Digimon and force this Digimon to attack it instead. So people might not really think that that's super great of an ability because basically any of their unsuspended Digimon can become blockers, but the interesting part about it is that this is basically acting as removal because you are forcing the opponent to choose, do you want to lose the security or do you want to lose your Digimon? And losing a Digimon could be very, very important, very, very devastating, and it could force the opponent into making a lot of bad plays, and it's just a really interesting ability to be playing around with. And then the last Mega of the deck is going to be the only level 7 of the deck, and that's going to be 3 copies of Chaosmon. So Chaosmon is a really powerful level 7 because he has 2 really good abilities that synergize very nicely with each other and with the deck. So his first ability is Piercing, so that way when he swings, he's always going to be dealing damage whether the opponent blocks or not, and it allows us to want to attack into our opponent's Digimon, so that way we could try to clear them if they're caught in a rested state, and we could deal damage to them at the same time, which is, again, pretty good. And then on top of that, he has a good when Digivolving ability, where we get to unsuspend this Digimon, then this Digimon can attack into an opponent's Digimon, and that attack can target an unsuspended Digimon. So the really interesting thing about this ability is even though the memory would pass over to the opponent, you still get the availability to resolve the ability, so that way you could attack even though the memory is on the opponent's turn, which is really interesting and really powerful just because he's one of the few cards in the game that can do that. On top of which, we're attacking into an unsuspended Digimon, so if they're trying to save a Digimon and not attack with it so that way it's not caught in a suspended state, then we could still Digivolve up into Chaosmon to try to get rid of it, and then the piercing will also deal them damage. So Chaosmon is just a really powerful Digimon to be utilizing for those abilities. Next, on to the options. I'm only going to be running 2 copies of Final Zubagon Punch. So Final Zubagon Punch is a really powerful card because it just makes this deck that much more threatening because of its main ability where you get to give one of your Digimon plus 3000 DP until the end of the opponent's next turn. So there's that persistent buff, so it'll last until the end of the opponent's turn. So that way it'll make it harder for them to deal with our Digimon with this buff active. And then if that Digimon has 16,000 or more DP, then it gains Blocker, Reboot, and Security Attack +1. So basically, we just get to turn all of our Megas into keyword soup, and basically feel free to swing because they'll have the Blocker, Reboot, and Security Attack +1. So they're going to be doing lots of damage, they'll protect themselves with Reboot, and they'll have Blocker going into the opponent's turn with that plus 3000 DP boost. So this card is just an absolutely insane card, especially paired up with either of our Megas, and like I said, the buff will carry over to our level 7 when we Digivolve up into it, so we could put this on Blastmon, swing with Blastmon to try to deal some very devastating damage or force the opponent to block with one of their active Digimon. And then we could Digivolve up into Chaosmon and basically still retain all of the buffs and try it again. And then this card has a nice security ability of adding itself to our hand, so that way we can figure out when is the best time that we want to utilize it when it's checked in our security. So this card is just really, really powerful and has good synergy with the deck. And then the last card of the deck is going to be the only tamer of the deck, and that's going to be 3 copies of Tai Kamiya. So Tai Kamiya is just our memory fixing tamer of the deck. That's the primary reason why we're running this card, but we also are running him because he has another ability where during the opponent's turn, all of our black Digimon get plus 1000 DP. So the plus 1000 DP does kind of matter just because it makes it that much more annoying for the opponent to interact with our Digimon and try to deal with our Digimon, and it could throw some of their numbers off, so that's why Tai is pretty decent to run. And then there's just a whole bunch of other cards that you could think about utilizing depending on the types of cards and synergy and support that you want to include in your version of the deck. So you could think about utilizing Greymon just because he's interacting with Reboot and giving our Digimon with Reboot jamming. But I just felt like because I'm going to be DP boosting most of the time, I didn't really need the jamming. But if you want to include it anyway, just to act as a good safety net, then you're more than welcome to. Then you could also still think about running War Greymon, just because this War Greymon is interacting with both Blocker and Reboot, which we are still going to be playing with a little bit of those synergies, so that just makes War Greymon a pretty decent card to still consider running. You could also think about running Craniamon. So Craniamon natively has Reboot, so we could still utilize a lot of our Reboot synergies with Craniamon. And then on top of that, he has a really good when Digivolving ability that allows us to play basically a black level 5 or lower Digimon off the top of our deck for free, which is pretty good considering most of the time we're so focused on going tall that we still need to have the ability to go wide, and Craniamon gives us that ability. You could also think about utilizing Black War Greymon in some really devastating ways with this deck. So this promo Black War Greymon's super powerful because he has the main ability of Digiburst 2, and his Digiburst ability basically allows us to unsuspend this Digimon. So what we could do with this card is utilize a lot of our abilities to play Zubagon Punch on him, and then with all of the effects of Zubagon Punch active on Black War Greymon, we could then utilize his Digiburst ability to throw away his evolution sources, and he'll still retain the Zubagon Punch buffs, and we could utilize that to just swing multiple times in one turn to just deal a whole bunch of damage to the opponent, and that's just super powerful to think about. Next, we could utilize Blitz Greymon from the Black starter deck, just because Blitz Greymon natively has security attack +1, so he just can hit relatively hard, and then he has the main ability of Digiburst 2, where we get to have one of our Digimon get plus 4000 DP until the end of the opponent's next turn. So he's just doing that very similar theme where we're just DP boosting our Digimon and then utilizing the DP boost to make Zubagon punch live and to have our Digimon be that much more powerful. Then we do have a couple of alternate level 7s that we could think about utilizing in the deck. So we could utilize Millenniumon just because he has a powerful when Digivolve ability to act as some removal that's not deleting the opponent's Digimon, so it allows us to get around certain protections. And then on top of which, he's a very sticky body because he has a nice on-delete ability where he just basically reses himself if he has any Digivolution sources underneath him. So Millenniumon is just a really powerful Digimon that we could think about running, and then on top of that, he just works with Zubagon Punch because Zubagon Punch will make him at that 16 mark, so that way we don't really have to put that much extra investment into him. And then because we also have access to other level 7s, we could think about running Omnimon Alter S just to act as some good additional removal for the deck. So his main ability is a when Digivolving ability to de-Digivolve 1, then trash any of the opponent's Digimon that have 5000 or less DP. So if the opponent is trying to build a wide board and try to close out the game with a wide board, Alter S just hard punishes them, and then his when attacking ability of making him unblockable is again really nice, especially if we pair him up with Zubagon Punch. Then it just makes it super hard for the opponent to come back with a lot of their security being broken, or we could use him to close out the game because we broke a lot of their security early on. Next, we could think about running Breath of the Gods. So Breath of the Gods is just a really good card because it turns all of our reboot synergy online in case we don't see ToyAgumon and we see a lot of our other cards by giving our Digimon reboot. And then it also gives our Digimon some additional protections from being returned back to our hand or deck, and it allows them for their DP not to be reduced. So again, it's just another good protection card that we could think about utilizing, but it also has a really powerful security ability where it basically just halts all of the opponent's further attacks when it's checked, and that's just really powerful because it could just save you the game. And then we have some alternate tamers that we could think about running. So Joe is really good because if we have a Digimon with blocker, then we get to gain 1 memory, and that's just pretty nice because black isn't the most memory efficient of colors, but the only downside is we do have to run blockers, but we're kind of already running blockers, so it's not like it's that big of a deal if you want to include Joe. And then if you don't want to include Tai, you could think about utilizing Izzy as a good memory fixing tamer because he still has that memory fixing ability. And then he has a really good on play ability where we get to check the top 3 cards of our deck, and then if all of them are black, we get to gain 1 memory and place them in any order. So stacking our deck is really powerful. Gaining the memory basically makes him a 3 cost instead of a 4 cost. The only white card in our deck that wouldn't trigger his memory gaining ability is Chaosmon, so that's the only card that we have to worry about, at least in this iteration of the deck. So if we just wanted to fix our draws, then Izzy is really good at doing so. But for the most part, this is just what my interpretation of like a Chaos Blastmon Zubagon Punch deck is going to be looking like. It's definitely a really interesting deck to be playing around with just because it is doing something completely different than a lot of other black decks, and it's definitely a lot of fun to just mess around because Zubagon Punch, Blastmon, and Chaosmon can just be dealing lots of damage onto the opponent and removing a lot of the opponent's potential threats just for them to try to save themselves from a hopeless fight. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, I'll have the deck listed down in the description below, and down in the description below will also be my TCG Player affiliate link. So if you want to support me and the channel, then using that link when you're buying cards off of TCG Player, some of that money will go and end up supporting me and the channel. And then on top of all that, as always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.